Hey there, this is a little video talking about how to make an ambient album in less than 2 hours. I'm using the DAW Reaper for this, but I'm sure there's some cross-application with other software as well. So all you need for this is Reaper and some sound files to get you started. It's going to be recordings of your own, recordings of other people's music, or some field recordings. Anything that's producing any sort of vaguely musical signal should be fine. We're going to take these sounds and turn them into phasing compositions and ambient pads, and then mixing these two things up, make an album's worth of ambient music. We're not going to use any plugins or any effects for this. We're just going to use the cutting and time stretching tools inside Reaper, which I think cuts down on sort of fiddling around time. And there's no reason, once you've got the knack of this, that you couldn't make this composition without actually listening to it. So from the point of dragging audio in, processing it, rendering out, and then publishing it, you should have a process here which will definitely give you a piece of ambient music. Right, so if you're not familiar with Reaper, don't worry, we're only going to be using very basic functionality of Reaper at this point. So if you open up a project in Reaper, you should start with one track, and all we're going to be doing today is taking audio, dragging it and dropping it into the project, and then cutting it up, which is done by moving the cursor over the point you want to cut with the clip selected, pressing the S key to split it up, and also be using the time stretch tool. So if you get to the edge of a clip, hold down Alt, you get this little hand here. This little hand can then make something longer, shorter, slower, faster. And I think the one other function we'll be using is if you've got a clip selected and you hit the button D, that's the D button, there's an option called Dynamic Split. And what Dynamic Split is doing is chopping up your file at any point of silence. This is often used for drum takes and things like this, just to isolate individual drum hits and parts. For us, we're just using it as a very quick way just to slice audio up so we can edit it. Right, so as I said, there's two techniques we're going to look at here. Let's look at the first one, turning a piece of music or a piece of sound recording into a phasing piece. So phasing is this minimalist composition technique where a little looped pattern is doubled, and then one of the two patterns goes ever so slightly out of time over the length of the composition. So you've got this one little riff, and then slowly, as one of them is sort of pulling away, getting ever so slightly slower with each repetition, you get this strange changing phase relation. This is a really nice way of making, out of very little material, variation over time. One riff, lots of variations, bargain. So that's something that's very easy to replicate inside a bit of music making software. So if you just grab a little tiny second long loop of any part of your sound or your music, something rhythmic is ideal for this rather than a thick pad sound, so you can get the sense of the phase. I'm just going to randomly zoom in here and just grab just a little section of music. Right, so once you've got that separated out, what I want you to do is to just copy and paste this little loop over and over and over and over again. Like so, many times. So you've just got this probably slightly not in time loop. Lovely. And then I want you to make another track underneath which has exactly the same information in it. In Reaper, that's as simple as clicking on this track and hitting the duplicate key by here. Great, so now we've got two versions of the same track banging out a little slightly wonky beat. Next thing I want you to do is to just merge these so they all behave like one file. So select both of them, click the mouse on it, and select glue items. So now you've just got one clip with this very long section of beat in it. How long is it at the moment? I've made this about a minute long. So now that you've got them both on top of each other like this, take the one on the bottom, and then using the stretch tool where we press Alt and then go to the edge of the clip to make the little hand, I want you just to drag across, just ever so slightly, just one beat. And what we should have now is a piece of phasing music, so they should begin in time and then very slightly over the length of the composition they should go out of time. But as they do it, it should hopefully create little interesting phase relations. There we go, lovely. So you've just got a piece of very simple music which is suddenly rendered a little bit more complex just by this idea of having a slightly slower version of the track underneath it. So there's a couple of variations on this that you can do as well. For example, stacking a load of these stretched parts out to make big layered dense pieces. You can also try doubling an entire track and then stretching one out and then checking out the phase relations you get going on with that. Another nice one as well is you can do a whole phase and then reverse one of the tracks, which in Reaper is just done by a second mouse button. Reverse items as new take, and that gives you a sort of strange pumping phase. So there's a range of ways that you can use phasing there to sort of just stretch out and abstract existing audio into something completely new. So that's our first technique. Let's look at a really nice quick way of turning recordings into long ambient pieces. So drag some audio into your project. This is using a very basic form of granular synthesis, using the auto crossfade functionality in music sequences. So an auto crossfade is when you get two clips in a project, two sound objects, and if you overlap them, rather than one playing directly after the other, this creates a crossfade, which fades between the two samples. So what we're going to do is chop the clip into hundreds of bits and then crossfade all of them together, and it'll make this big long swooshing sample out of this previously rhythmic track. So to do this, click on your clip and hit the D key. The D key will give us this aforementioned dynamic split. So what this tool is doing again is just cutting the clip up into loads and loads of bits. You could do this manually with the split tool, but in the spirit of trying to process lots and lots of tracks at once to make an album's worth of material in a couple of hours, the dynamic split is a better option. So once your file is split up into loads and loads of chunks, what you need to do then is make sure that they're all selected, and then grab the edge of the file like we did before and pull it across. So what's happened as you've done that is all the files have been resized into each other. So you can see all this crazy looking crossfade information where hundreds of files have attempted to crossfade into each other. This is now quite processor heavy because it's got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of automated crossfades going on. So you might find playing this a little bit slow. So once you've done this, what you need to do now is, with all of your clips selected, hit the second mouse button on them and hit glue items. This will render them back into one track again. This will take quite a long time depending on how many cuts you've made and how far you're stretching it, so be patient with this. It'll take a little while to consolidate the track. Right, so once that's completed, your track should now sound like a big washy ambient pad, where previously we had we now have a big swooshy ambient pad version of the track. Sometimes this might sound a little bit distorted. As all this crossfade information is obviously multiplying audio as it crosses over, so you might find that the clip volume has distorted. So if you're having that problem prior to doing the process of splitting and then time stretching everything into each other, just double click the audio file, just bring the volume down on the clip by about 10 decibels. So you see it's smaller here now, and that should make it a little bit more friendly to the process of splitting and gluing back together. So here you see the lower volume version of the same process. And that's actually sounding a little bit cleaner and a little bit more gentle. So you're going to get different sounds out of this depending on how many splits you make, on how far or how short you spread this clip across by dragging it in the time stretch, and also how much you cut out as well, so you can actually select and remove bits of the clip to give yourself a more sparse sound as well. So very quickly you've just got two tools there for just making abstracted soundscapes out of your existing audio. Right, so let's do it. Let's use those tools to make a ambient album. So I've got a brand new project here in Reaper, and I have got over here some music. Let's pick a random album. So I'm going to grab all of the tracks from this album and drag them into the project into separate tracks. Right, so first thing I'm going to do is lower the volume on all of the tracks, just to make sure when we do our granular stuff to them, they don't get too distorted. So I'm just double clicking on each track, dropping the volume. So what I'm going to do next is select half the tracks to submit the first process of phasing, and then half the tracks submit to the second process of granular dragging or ambientizing. So on the first track, I'm just going to select a portion, copy and paste it all across the track many times. Do our phasing by stretching one of the doubled tracks. The next one I'm going to put the entire track out of phase rather than a little loop, and so on in each turn to each track. I'm going to do different variations on the two aforementioned techniques to each one. So every single track has been processed and abstracted into oblivion using these two processes, so they don't sound very much at all like the original source material, and they're ready to be exported. I know you're thinking, what about volume levels and things like that? What I usually do at this point is get a lovely plugin called Loudmax by Thomas Munt, which is a very effective brick wall limiter, and then set it to -1 dB on the master, and just let it do its work. If all of your tracks are at 0 dB, which they should be, and your music, if you take the individual clips and then normalize them, then your output for each track should arrive at a very tidy 0.01 decibels, or thereabouts. Let's not worry about it too much, eh? So now all that's needed is to export your tracks. And there you go, that's your ambient album. I've just done that as a process without actually listening to any of these tracks, but they've all been bounced out of the machine. I'm sure they're very lovely, so I will go and release them over on Utililux, and you can go have a listen to them yourself. That'll be known as the Recipie 1 tutorial album if you want to check it out. So yeah, that's it. That's a couple of techniques you can use for very quickly making a bit of ambient music. Why not give it a go?